The movie begins with motivational speaker Valerie on stage, giving a speech in front of a crowd. Something feels off, though, as we keep seeing her scratching her head and having random visions of herself drowning and swimming underwater. Later, we see her talking to a friend, becoming even more stressed about changes in her tour schedule. That night, unable to sleep, she starts researching itchy skin conditions online. Soon after, she criticizes her husband's video editing work for her world tour ad. We then see her meditating when a bunch of disembodied hands begin caressing her. She gets distracted by an ant, follows it, and discovers a big hole in her wall. Later, she visits her aunt's salon and gets a manicure. While grabbing some keepsakes from old boxes in storage, the lights go out. She gets spooked by the altar. Her aunt comes to check on her. That night, when she gets home, we see her taking contraceptive pills without her husband's knowledge. Later, she scratches her head so hard it bleeds. She patches it up before calling a doctor to ask for a prescription. But the doctor wants to schedule a checkup since she has a medical history. The doctor suspects it's psychological and possibly hereditary, like her mom's condition. Instead of going to the hospital, she visits a monastery. She waits until the monks are done praying. One of the monks is her dad, and they catch up. After lighting incense, they go to his room, and she demands that he return some boxes. Monk dad reminds her that holding on to material things is bad. She gets distracted by a painting. Monk dad explains the story of the Sanchi, a hungry ghost parasite. The ghost attaches to its host and slowly consumes the victim's body and soul. She gets dizzy and hallucinates ants. When her dad goes to fetch water, she rifles through his stuff, finds a storage key, takes it, and drives off. She finds a certificate in one of the drawers in a photo album. The lights flicker, and she hears footsteps and soft cries, so she follows them. She finds more ants. A security guard spooks her. She goes home. She listens to her speech while fixing the wall and doing some DIY. She looks at old photos in the album and notices her mom had the same rashes. Later, at dinner, her husband tries to calm her down. She accuses him of manipulating her and shows him her book. That night, she wears mittens before sleeping to prevent scratching. An ant crawls into her mouth. She chokes and begins vomiting hordes of ants. But it's just a dream. She wakes up with her rashes bleeding. She ignores calls from her dad, who tries to warn her about something. Later, she visits her aunt and gives her tickets for her tour. She asks about her mom and her rashes, wondering what caused them. Her aunt reveals that after the war, something cursed her. She warns her to stay away from her dad, too. During a photo shoot, she begins seeing things again. As the light flashes, shadowy hands attack her. Later, she overhears her husband telling her manager they should cancel the tour because she's unwell. That night, she makes love with her husband. She gets rough and starts hurting him. He wants to stop, but she insists. Her husband notices the bleeding rashes on her head. They fight about it. She accuses him of controlling her. But he counters, saying she's the control freak. Her husband sleeps on the couch. He wakes up to the noise of her doing more DIY. She's making a contraption to automatically tie her arms so she can't scratch as she sleeps. But she wakes up to a growling sound. A shadowy creature frees her hand, allowing her to scratch her head. She wakes up to her angry husband demanding that she open the door. But it was just a jump scare dream. The next morning, she apologizes to her husband, but he's gone. He already found out about the pills and isn't answering her calls anymore. She keeps listening to her motivational speech as she wallows. Her monk dad arrives and warns her about the Sanchi. She accuses him of using drugs again and refuses to give him more money. The tea he gives her makes her dizzy, so she demands he leave her house. He takes money from her purse before leaving. She gets nauseous and concludes that her family must be drugging her, causing all the hallucinations. She goes back to the storage facility in a delirious state. She remembers her mother's suicide. Back at home, while reading old newspaper clippings, the ceiling leaks. She goes up to find the source of the leak. She looks out the window and sees her mother drowning. Her memory returns, and she remembers seeing her dad drowning her mom. She grabs a knife and goes to his place. She rifles through his stuff and finds drugs. She demands answers. He attacks her. She fights back with the knife. She wants to know why her dad killed her mom. Her dad reveals he was only trying to save her. She was born with it. Flashbacks show her dad as a soldier, shooting a kid holding a grenade. That's where the Sanchi demon was born, and it latched onto him. He reveals there's only one way to kill it. It turns out her mom was trying to kill her as a child. Her dad only killed her mom to save her. But she refuses to believe any of it and just blames the drugs. She leaves him crying. Her manager calls her. She has a live show that night. She arrives at the studio and gets her makeup done. She sees her husband, but he's still angry and doesn't want to talk. On stage, she asks for a volunteer. She gives her speech while trying to contain the itch on her head. But she gets distracted when she hears growling sounds. She begins convulsing on stage, scratching her head uncontrollably. Her husband and manager try to follow her. She drives back to her dad and apologizes. But she's shocked to find him dead. She feels something coming out of her head wound. She touches it. She wakes up in the ICU. The doctor explains that she literally scratched her brains out. While lying in the hospital bed, she sees the creature hugging her. Later, we see her at home with her husband taking care of her. She's getting better. After more tests, the doctor reveals that the hallucinations are symptoms of brain damage. At night, her husband ties her down to prevent scratching. But in the morning, she cuts herself free. She confesses her father's theory about the Sanchi to her husband, but he doesn't believe it. Alone at home, she keeps watching her motivational videos. Her video self begins warning her that her husband will send her to a mental hospital. When her husband returns, she surprises him with dinner. She apologizes again. She tries to explain that there's something inside her and she needs to get it out. He collapses. She drugged him. She ties him to the bed and plays her audiobook. She sets up mirrors and lights candles and incense. She tries to communicate with the Sanchi, asking what it wants. The Sanchi manifests and breaks the mirrors. It wants everything. It communicates through her video, advising her to self-harm. She breaks her laptop. She builds a buzzsaw contraption to cut off her hand. She hesitates but eventually cuts it off. She cauterizes the wound and calls 911, but can't speak. The Sanchi tells her it will destroy her piece by piece. It helps her cut off her other hand. But she tricks it and cuts its hands instead. She fights off the creature with her saw. The creature regenerates. She crawls away and musters her strength to drag it into the pool. As she drowns, she sees her mother trying to save her. But in reality, her husband saves her. She's clutching a baby Sanchi, which dissolves in the water. Later, she shows her husband a sonogram. Like what her mother used to say, she tells her baby that the evil will always be inside them. But it's their choice whether to let it destroy them.